So Adobe Dimensions is a fairly new application that allows you to do some 3D manipulation, but it's a little bit more, how do I say it, isolated in terms of what you can do with the application in terms of 3D modeling. There's a limited set of 3D models that it comes with. You can import your own 3D models, but essentially what I think this entire application is for people who want to do product placement advertising. They want to show a new product maybe with a label, and they want to put it in a specific environment. That seems to be the central focus of this particular application. So first of all, we'll take a look at the app and what it can do and what's involved. And then secondly, we'll take a look at creating a product and lighting it and giving it texture, materials, and all that other stuff, and then seeing what we can do with it. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a new document. And you'll see that we have two tabs up here, Design and Render. We have some controls over on the left-hand side. And there are 4 panes here. The first pane is all the different models. And these are some default models that Adobe Dimensions ships with. You can see that there's some bags, there's some jars, there's some tables. There's some primitive shapes, cubes, cones, capsules. So it's a pretty good set of models, and if you need more models, you can download them from the Adobe stock collection. The second option here is for materials, and these are materials that you apply to those models, and you'll see that there's a bunch of different options like glitter, ice, leather, and then if you need to, you can download more. The third option here is for lights, and this is kind of a weird setup. It's not like you drag in a light and you choose which type of light it is. These are light setups for studio backgrounds and typical lighting sets. And then the last option here is for images, and these are images that you can insert as a background. You can insert onto the actual artwork itself, and I'll explain more about that. So I'm going to go back to the model section. And then we have this 3D environment over here. In the middle, you can see my 3D plane. So the X, Y, and the Z axis are going to be interpreted here. And then we have our scene bucket, which will include all of our elements. So right now, we have a default environment. We have a default camera. And then as we drag models in here and we start building, you'll see all the other elements that are going to be in here. And then we have an inspector, which will change depending on what we're working on. So first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select a model, and I'm going to just click on it, and it's going to insert it into the 3D environment. And you can see on it, it has the green, red, and blue triangles, arrows I should say. And then inside you have this matrix that allows you to move on more than one plane. So if I click and drag on the Z axis, you can see that the model moves on that axis. If I click and drag on the red arrow, it goes on the X axis. And if I drag on the green arrow, it'll go on the Y axis. Notice that it's dipping underneath the model plane. And if I move it to a certain location, it kind of eventually it snaps to the actual plane itself. Now, to manipulate and to move around in the camera, I'm using my middle mouse right now, and I'm just using that as a scroll wheel to zoom in or to dolly in and to dolly out. If I click and hold on that middle mouse, what I can do is kind of not really orbit, but move along the X and a little bit on the Z plane, so I can move that around. And then if I click and hold on my right mouse key, you can see that I'm kind of orbiting now. So I can orbit around the actual object in both X, Y, and Z space. Notice that there's a default light setup. You can see some highlights here and shadows along the bottle. So it's a pretty decent model. Now, while you're working in Dimensions, you're working in kind of a lo-fi setup. So what I mean by that is the rendering is not perfect. You notice that the edges are kind of jaggy here It's kind of like what we saw in Illustrator, so it's not really clean. But when we go to render this out, and that's the whole purpose of using this program, to render out a flat file, and you'll see that you can ramp up that quality real quick. So the tools over here on the left, I used shortcuts there before. I used the middle mouse key to move around. I used the right mouse key to orbit. But those tools are here as well. So if I click on this tool, that's my orbit tool. I can do the same thing that I wanted to there. If I click this tool, that's the XY tool that I was using before with my middle mouse key. And this is to dolly in and to dolly out, so I can zoom in, zoom out, which was what I was doing with my scroll mouse. Okay, so you can use those tools, or you can just use the mouse keyboard shortcuts. In the next video, we'll continue with this, and we'll start building our illustration.